Okay, as you see, I was on my Instagram for Rojo Chief Clothing, and I'm clicking on my online clothing store. And on here, I have clothes. I got hoodies, sweatshirts. If you like to buy them, long sleeve, short sleeve. I'm clicking on hoodies right now for men, and that's one. And then I'm clicking back just to show you fashions that I have for women. Like I have long sleeve shirt. Okay. Then I even have clothing for babies as well and kids. So that's the onesie. You can get that in different colors, as well as t-shirts, hoodies, and long sleeves for kids. So now, let's get ready for the show. Reading from the book Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 by David McRitchie. Okay, this is page 13 in the book Ancient and Modern Britons, a Retrospect, Volume 1 by David McRitchie. It says Red Indian Theory, page 13. Now, I'm reading from the second paragraph on this page. In addition to the black or brown and yellow races already spoken of as a prehistoric Europeans, there is a theory that a copper-colored race closely akin to some branches of the American Indians once inhabited Europe, or rather than the southern parts of Europe and North Africa. So, okay, as we know, I'm going to pause right there so you guys can think about that for a minute. We know that the original definition for American, they say, was the aboriginal copper-colored races. And right here, they're talking about a copper-colored race that they found in prehistoric Europe, what they say are akin or like closely related to the American Indian that came from the American Indian branches. So when they say American Indian branches, they're saying that these people, they believe that these folks were the Red Indian or the American Indian. And we know the American Indians are the copper-colored races of America, the Aborigines, which we know are our ancestors who have been, reclassified as blacks and Negroes. Okay? That's who the American Indians are. So these are the people that they're referring to, because you got to keep in mind when they say Red Indian, they're talking about the reddish brown complexion of the people. They're talking about the brown color of your skin with this red undertone. That's what they mean by Red Indian. Okay? So anyways, it says once inhabited Europe and rather the southern parts of Europe. So they're talking about like Spain, Italy, that area. Okay? And it said North Africa. So we know North Africa, that would be, in particular, he was talking about Egypt. Okay, now it says the modern Copts. It says proofs of this are said to be visible in the complexion of the modern Copts, which is a reddish, and the Nubians, who are described as a deep red color, with nothing of the Negro in their profile, and with their oval faces. This theory has been started by an Italian archaeologist named Gennarelli and may be seen at length in the Journal of Anthropological Institute. Its leading points are summarized. In support of the hypothesis of kinship between the red races of Europe and America, Gennarelli adduces, it says, A, the existence of pyramids in Egypt, America, and Etruria, the labyrinths in Egypt, America, and Etruria, and the title Children of the Sun, borne both by the Incas and the Pharaohs, mummies in Egypt and America, and images of mummies and Etruria, hieroglyphic languages in Egypt and America, languages having a similar structure in America, Iberia, which we know is Spain and Portugal, and Etruria. It says Humboldt thought there were affinities between the Basque and the Etruscans, and we know the Etruscans were supposed to have been the ancestors of the Romans. Okay, so let's keep it going. It says, and the Nile in Egypt and a Nile region in Guatemala, from the Cordillera of San Nusca to the Pacific, and the canopics and sacrificial vases in Egypt, Mexico, and the Yucatan. So basically, he was saying that there is a connection between the canopic and sacrificial vases that you find in Egypt, that those same things, those canopic and sacrificial vases that's in Egypt, you also find them in the Yucatan and also in Mexico and Peru. And he also had mentioned the mummies being in Egypt and images of mummies in Etruria. And he also mentioned the hieroglyphics in Egypt and the hieroglyphics in America. And we know the people who had hieroglyphics, who drew in hieroglyphics, were the Mayans, which are American Indians, right? So that's the connections he's making between these areas. And then he also mentioned, he said the names similar to the deities they represent. And he says in the root ATL, or alt, which is the original signification, he asserts to belong not to European, but to American languages. It says Garnelli further supports his theory by the assertion that animals of American origin. Then it goes on, page 14 of Ancient and Modern Britons. It says, unknown to Africa are to be found among the Egyptian hieroglyphics. So basically, he's saying that those hieroglyphics, they didn't originate over in Africa, but they were found with the, Egyptians, right? So he's saying basically that the Egyptian hieroglyphics are similar to the Mayan hieroglyphics. And I made a video about that, talking about that, discussing that, how phonetically the Egyptian hieroglyphics are spoken similarly to Mayan. So Mayan words and Egyptian words are similar in how you pronounce them. So that's probably one of the things that he was talking about. And as we already know, the Egyptians are known for their advanced mummification of pharaohs and other dignitaries. And then you also had mummies that was in South America that are older than the mummies over in Egypt. So that's the American and Egypt connection as well. So it says here, it says, and in the paintings or sculptures on the vases and monuments of Etruria, he also points to evidence of existence in Italy of races which were neither Aryan or Semitic. So when he's talking about Aryan, I believe he's talking about the people who are considered, kind of like pale type people. Or Shemitic, he's talking about people that will be considered as like Middle Eastern or like Jewish type people. So he's saying that no, they're not Aryan or Shemitic. He says under the various names of Aborigine, Sikuli, Liguri, and Umbri. And he says, and he also suggests that the Phoenicians were of a copper color hue. And see, and that's another thing too. that the Etruscans and the Phoenicians were supposed to have been the ancestors of the Italians as well, and the Greeks had contributed to the heritage of the people in that particular area. And he's saying that those people were copper colored as well, just like the Egyptians. And also they even mentioned that the Nubians and the Copts in North Africa also had a reddish brown complexion as well. Okay, so anyways, it is perhaps scarcely correct to describe this as a third division of a dark-skinned people, for Signor Narelli, red is not very different from Professor Huxley's chocolate brown. So he's saying basically right there that red and chocolate brown are basically the same thing. Okay? So that's the reason why I have my Indian chief named Rojo. Rojo is Spanish for red, and his color is red because to signify that red complexion of the American Indian. Okay? Alright, so the connection between the last theory and the consideration of, it says red is not different from the chocolate brown, the colors ascribed by each of the ancient Egyptians. The connection between the last theory and the consideration of ancient Britons becomes apparent when it remembers that not only are the people allied to the Egyptians, but also the Astroloids, but there is also a legend that the Scots are of Egyptian descent, while the Phoenician intercourse with Britain, there is no doubt. However, the red color of the Phoenicians are seen only a suggestion. As with the Iberians, according to M. de Arbos de Jubanville, the red race of the Italian antiquity is assumed to have come into Europe out of the sunken island continent Atlantis, which our grandfathers spoke of as the fabled Atlantis, but which is a voyage of the Challenger and the study of geology have both proved to be no fable. So, in other words, they thought that it was a fable at first about where the copper-colored people came from in Italy, and they're saying that the copper-colored Aborigines of Italy came from Atlantis, and they thought that was a fable. They thought Atlantis was made up. They thought it was a myth. But they said, no, the truth is that Atlantis actually did exist. And that's where the Aborigines from Italy came from. And we know Atlantis is nothing but a Masonic code word for ancient America. So anyways, it says the point of difference between scientific men now seem to be rather probable date of the subsidence of the continent, which is contended by some, but must be remote as to preclude the possibility of establishing a race connection between the two continents. Now, it says here, in ancient and modern Britons, I typed in the word Indian for this Google ebook, and on page 180, I found out, it says, on page 180 of Ancient and Modern Britons, it says, who were painted people, or Picts. Now, the Picts, like I said, King McAlpin descended from the Picts. His mother was a Pictish princess, right? According to this book. And watch what they say about the Picts, who the Picts were. It says, for this word, kill, spelled K-E-E-L, or Kel, in its sense of brutal, exists among obsolete Gaelic words under its form, Sil, C-I-L, which, like its other form, Gil, G-I-L-L-E, pronounced Kel or Kellic. Thus, Although the word was long outlived its primary significance, the Kelly or red-stained man was to a certain race the equivalent of a servant. A parallel case is apparently found in the Jur Omit, literally a wood-stained son, which Shaw defines as a brave servant, a sturdy domestic. It would also seem from this that the reason why rude, Ruadh, red, should come to signify tawny, is precisely similar to that which made the Duan dub, a black man, a Duan gram, wood-stained man, interchangeable terms, that which made such words as glass, Glas, or grom, Gorm, used in Scotland and in Wales, and in apparently most contradictory fashion. One place green or blue, and the other brown or swarthy. The explanation in all these cases being that the swarthy people were also rude or red stained or gram or wood colored. So they're saying that these people in Scotland, they was described in Wales and Scotland as being called green, blue, brown, swarthy, brown colored people or red colored people. It says Billy Marshall, the famous gypsy chief of the Galloway, who was clearly an 18th century representative of the marauding quote-unquote Moors that ravaged that district in the 15th century, and a distant kinsman of the savage Blackamoor and the local tradition, and as clearly ascendant of the remote and red smear natives pictured by the 16th century historian, also by the barbarous custom, the fellow of the vermilion-dusted Wasatch, now claiming on the feeders of the Arkansas. In looking at the gypsies, one other constantly reminded of the resemblance, it would be absurd to assert that the two peoples were identical, as it would be to accept that they should be so. For the British Indian has had a vastly different history from the American cousins. So they're saying that the British, that they were cousins to the Americans. And now what we know when they say Americans, we know they're talking about the Aborigines. They're talking about the Indians, which is us. That's what they're referring to. They're saying that basically they're talking about the British. They said that the British were Indians. It said the British Indian has had a vastly different history from the American cousins. A much earlier contact with Christian civilization, an alliance or repeated alliance with other varieties of the dusky race. So we know dusky means dark. Dusky is dark, okay? They didn't say pale, they said dusky. So we know dusky is like brown, is dark. It says a greatly numerical force with which to meet with the advances of the whites, thereby saving themselves from extermination, having all combined to render a gypsy different from the Indian in various ways. Then they say, page 181, it says British Indians. It says pages that they treat the doings of the ghillie whistles suggest the likeness again. It may be permissible to say a few words further on the subject. The picture given, while shows the points of contact between the two peoples and reveals the dissimilarity, it refers to the earlier part of the century, or perhaps more exactly to the century before. Great numbers of these gypsy plunderers, and they crossed the Forth of Queen's Ferry for the purpose of stealing and robbing of the fairs in the north of Scotland. They were, in general, well dressed and could not have been taken for gypsies because they were in country that included among his people great numbers peacefully, the Melancholy, as swarthy as their wilder kindred now were. At the inn where they used to be up, no fewer than 14 of the plunderers have frequently been seen sitting at breakfast with Captain Gordon, their commander and their head. I believe they were among the best customers the landlord had. Gypsies, however, are by no means habitual drinkers or tipplers, but when they do sit down, it is the phraseology of the sea, a complete blowout. Okay, so they describe these people as being like Indians, or they call the British Indians. Okay, so I'm skipping down to page 182. It says their name, Kelly's, had evidently fallen into destitute, but suppose them a century or two earlier, when they were armed to the teeth, when they were bold enough to besiege a mansion house in open day, or ferocious enough to engage in savage tribal fights, when such marauders expedition, their dusky faces were ruddled with iron ore and good grounds, supposing they were nearly as naked as their forefathers, and that this is picture but of a red Indian foray. They were nearly naked, and during comparatively recent times, may be assumed for various reasons, as long as they were out and out pics, as long, that is, the painting was not confined to the vestige so long would they be unclothed. Hordorian said that their ancestors, that they do not clothe themselves, lest they should cover the painting of their bodies, under the Gaelic name, Kinthuth. The naked wild men, living in caves, their Gibbold kinsmen in Ireland, during the 16th century were naked rebels. In Ireland, a few centuries ago, says Captain Burt in his letters from the north of Scotland, the lower class seldom encumbered themselves with a dress of any kind within doors. There is every reason to suppose that this is also the case among the brethren in Scotland. Gypsies, generally in warmer climates than ours, represented are partially clothed, their children wholly naked, and there is a strong hint in their own language. At one time, English gypsies were themselves naked wild men. Okay, so that's what they refer to them as. And then going down to page 183, it said, in effect, the British Moors, Picts, or Gypsies, because we know Gypsies was just another word for Egyptians. And I read to you before how they made a comparison between the Incas, which we know are American Indians, and the Egyptians, and their complexion, and the fact that they both had sacrificial and conopic jars in both Egypt and amongst the Incas as well, and how there was hieroglyphics and pyramids in both Egypt and America. So so gypsy is nothing but another word for Egyptian. Okay, so anyways, and so it says that more centuries ago were very much like the modern American Indian. I'm going to stop it right there. Okay, like the American Indian. I want you to think about that for a minute. And it says they have been gradually subdued in this country, and so and perceptually blended with the general population in which they form a great part, that we do not see this so clearly as we should. It says if they had been photographed and written up half as much as their transatlantic kindred, we think that because they bear familiar surnames, they must be very much the same as ourselves. But their nature, when it allowed to show itself, it was the wild Tartars or Indians. Okay, so now on this part of the book, which is 357, it says English people like ourselves, found everywhere in the peerage, the learned professions in all ranks of our people, from the duke to the commoner. Whence did they come, or whence did we come for the dark whites are ourselves too? Whence did we come? From the blending of the fair whites and the pure blacks, says Professor Huxley. The blood of all of the educated British Malacori, like that of the uneducated classes, of which Mr. Leland writes, is leavened with Indian blood. Our nomadic population, after all, is compared of English people like ourselves. It says, it is not so very long ago that the conveniently gypsy of the almost black complexion, the followers of John the Fall, in the old ballad, the spoken of the black crew, and as black, but very bonny, the rhyme which was Scotch mothers used to all their children, spoke of the black tinkler. And in 1681, the Indians of New England, which they also called them Moors, but in quotation, he has Moors in quotations, but as you see here, that they basically tell you that the British definitely had an American Indian ancestors. And they also had mentioned these American Indians being in the bloodline of the British. Okay, and we know that the British would consist of the people from Wales, England, Scotland, and Ireland. And that the Picts, they also mentioned the Picts as being ruddy or red or brown, or called wooden or glass in their Gaelic. And then it was also mentioned in this book how the languages that they found in Italy, in Iberia, which would be Spain, and as well as Portugal, it all bears witness to the American Indians being in Europe. And they also mentioned how the British, they literally called the British gypsies, and they also referred to them as being Indians, and they referred to them as being Moors, but they used the word Moor in quotation mark because they called the Indians Moors as well, because Moor back then also meant a person of a brown complexion. That's what it meant back then. They were talking about the color. So when they said Moor, that's what they meant by that. It was a descriptive term of how the British Indians, what they look like. And they also said that the British Indians were the same as their American cousins. So they're basically saying that the British people, that they're related to the American Indians because they descended from the American Indians. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell if you haven't already to know when I drop a new video. Thanks.